I found out my best friend had been living my life for 3 years when a stranger walked up to me at my own work conference and said, "Oh my God, you're the real Cassie Monroe?" I remember standing there with a glass of white wine in my hand, wearing the black dress I'd saved up 3 weeks of tips to buy, and the floor just dropped out from under me. The woman staring at me was maybe 40, well dressed, pearl earrings, the kind of woman who doesn't rattle easily. But she was rattled. She was gripping her cocktail napkin so hard it was shredding in her fingers, and her eyes kept moving between my face and something across the room. "I'm sorry," I said. "Do I know you?" She leaned in close, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something expensive, something cedar heavy and serious. "You need to talk to me before this night is over," she whispered. "What your friend has been doing to you, honey, you have no idea." And she was right. I had absolutely no idea. But let me go back to the beginning, because you need to understand what Danny meant to me before you can understand what she took. I grew up in a town called Harlow Creek, Virginia. If you've never heard of it, that's exactly right. It's one of those places that exists mostly in the rearview mirror of people who left. A strip of fast food restaurants along Route 9, a Dollar General, a water tower with the high school mascot painted on it, and about 12,000 people who mostly know each other's business and mostly mind it anyway. My parents were good people. My dad drove a delivery truck. My mom worked checkout at the Kroger until her knees gave out, and then she took a job answering phones at a dentist's office. We weren't poor, exactly, but money had texture in our house. You could feel it, the way you feel weather coming. A tight month had a certain silence to it. A good month meant my mom bought the brand name cereal, and my dad didn't check the gas prices 3 times before filling up. I knew from the time I was maybe 8 years old that I was going to leave Harlow Creek. Not because I hated it. I didn't hate it, not really, but because I could feel the ceiling, and I didn't like ceilings. I wanted space. I wanted room to become something I hadn't figured out yet. I spent my teenage years reading everything I could get my hands on, working at the Dairy Queen on weekends, saving every dollar I didn't spend on school supplies. I got a partial scholarship to study marketing at Virginia Commonwealth University, took out loans for the rest, and drove away from Harlow Creek on a Tuesday morning in August with everything I owned in the back of my dad's borrowed truck and this feeling in my chest like a balloon being filled up slowly. I met Daniela Ruiz, Dani, during freshman orientation. She was standing behind me in the line for ID photos, complaining under her breath about the fluorescent lighting in a way that was so specific and funny that I laughed out loud before I could stop myself. She was beautiful in that effortless way that some women are. Dark hair that did exactly what she wanted it to, eyes the color of strong coffee, this loose, unhurried way of moving that made everything she did look intentional. She grew up in Richmond itself, in a neighborhood called The Fan, which to my Harlow Creek eyes felt impossibly cosmopolitan. Her parents were both professors. Her childhood bookshelf had books on it in 3 languages. But here's the thing. Danny never made me feel small. That was what I loved about her first. She had every reason to be condescending to a girl from a truck stop town with outlet mall clothes and a secondhand laptop, and instead she linked her arm through mine on that first day and said, "You and I are going to be best friends. I can already tell." And she said it with such absolute certainty, like she was reading something written on the air between us, that I believed her completely. And she was right. We were best friends. We were the kind of best friends that people write songs about, that people look at from the outside and feel a little wistful about, like they're watching something rare. We studied together, laughed together, cried together through heartbreaks and family crises, and the particular grinding misery of junior year when everything feels impossible. We graduated together, hugged each other in our cap and gowns, while our parents took photos. We moved to Washington, D.C. together, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbia Heights that smelled like old carpet and the Thai place downstairs. And we were so happy about it that we didn't even care. I got a job as a junior account coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm called Callaway and Reed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And I worked at it the way I worked at everything, with everything I had. I stayed late. I took on extra projects. I learned every system, every client, every preference of every person above me. I was hungry in the way that people who grew up checking gas prices are hungry. Not desperately, not bitterly, but quietly and constantly, like a pilot light that never goes out. Within 2 years, I was a senior account manager. By my 4th year, I had my own portfolio of clients, a reputation for reliability and creativity, and I'd been asked to speak at an industry conference for the first time. That conference, the Mid-Atlantic Marketing Summit, held at the Marriott Marquis in downtown D.C., was the one where my entire world cracked open. But we'll get there. Danny, meanwhile, had taken a different path. She'd bounced between jobs for the first couple of years. A nonprofit communications role, a brief stint at a PR agency, some freelance writing. Nothing stuck. I never judged her for it. She was figuring herself out, which is a legitimate thing to do in your 20s. She seemed happy, or something that looked like happy. She dated a string of interesting, slightly unreliable men. She was funny and social, and our apartment was always full of people who liked her. Then, about 3 years before the night at the conference, Danny's mother got sick. Not dramatically sick. Not a sudden emergency, but the slow, relentless kind of sick that requires attention and care and pulls you backward toward home. Danny moved out of our apartment to go back to Richmond and be closer to her family. I helped her pack. We cried, we made all the promises that best friends make, every weekend, phone calls every day, nothing changes. And at first, mostly, nothing did. We talked constantly. She came up to DC for weekends, and I went down to Richmond for long Saturdays at her parents' house, eating her mother's cooking and pretending nothing was different. But something did shift, gradually. The way light shifts in a room when a cloud moves, you don't notice the moment it changes, only that something feels different from how it did before. She started asking more questions about my work. That was the first thing, though I didn't think anything of it at the time. Danny had always been interested in my career. She was proud of me, supportive, enthusiastic, but the questions got more specific. Not, how was your week? But, what exactly do you say in a pitch presentation? Not, are you networking? But, what networking events do you go to and who runs them and what's the vibe like? I answered everything openly and completely, the way you do with someone you trust entirely, someone you've known half your life, someone you would literally give a kidney to without a second thought. She asked about my clients. I told her. She asked about my process for building proposals. I walked her through it, step by step, because I thought she was trying to build her own freelance marketing practice, and I wanted to help. She asked about the conferences I attended, the industry contacts I'd made, even specific colleagues by name. I thought she was doing research. I thought she was planning her next chapter. I was so wrong about what she was planning. About 2.5 years before the conference, Danny mentioned she'd been doing some consulting work online, building up a LinkedIn presence, pitching herself as a marketing strategist. I was thrilled for her. I told her I'd look at her profile and give feedback. She always had some excuse for why it wasn't quite ready for me to see yet. She was still tweaking it, still adding portfolio pieces. The photo wasn't right. I let it go. I had my own work to stay on top of, and I trusted her. I should have looked. God, I should have looked. I noticed the first real crack about 18 months before the conference, though I plastered over it in my mind almost immediately because the alternative was something I couldn't bear to think about. I was at a client dinner, a nice restaurant in Georgetown, white tablecloths, the kind of place where the sommelier is actually helpful and doesn't just upsell you. My client, a man named Philip Gentry, who ran a mid-Atlantic chain of urgent care clinics, leaned across the table and said, "You know, it's funny. I spoke with a marketing consultant a few months back who pitched us an approach almost identical to yours. I mean, almost word for word. Some of it. Same terminology, same framework. I thought she must have learned from you somehow." I laughed it off. Imitation and all that. Industries have shared vocabularies. I didn't ask who the consultant was. I should have asked. I didn't. The second crack came about a year before the conference. I was on the phone with my college roommate, Priya. She'd stayed in Richmond and was working in healthcare administration. And she mentioned, casually, the way you mention something you assume the other person already knows, that she'd seen Danny at some kind of marketing mixer in Richmond, and that Danny had been talking about her work in DC, her clients, her upcoming speaking engagement. Priya said Danny had seemed really confident, really impressive. "Her speaking engagement?" I said. "Yeah, she said she was presenting at some conference, Mid-Atlantic something." My stomach moved. Just a small, cold shift, like ice sliding in a glass. "That's my conference," I said. "I'm the one presenting at that." Silence on Priya's end. Then, "Oh, maybe I misunderstood her. You know how loud those events get." I told myself Priya had misheard. I told myself Danny was probably talking about me, referencing my conference, my presentation, and Priya had just gotten confused about whose story it was. I told myself this so firmly and so immediately that I almost believed it. Almost. Because underneath the telling, in that deep, quiet place where you know things before you're ready to know them, something had gone still and watchful. I called Danny that night. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice easy, bright, normal. "Priya said she saw you at a mixer last week?" "Oh, yeah! It was so fun. I should have told you there was a great turnout. She said you mentioned my conference." A tiny pause, the length of a heartbeat. "Oh, yeah. I was telling people about it, talking you up. You know how I am. I'm your biggest hype woman." And just like that, the ice slid back, and the water was still again. Because that was a perfectly reasonable thing. Of course she was talking me up. Of course she was proud of me. That was just Danny. That was just Danny. I don't want you to think I was naive. I want you to understand something about close friendship, about the particular blindness that intimacy creates. When you have built nearly a decade of trust with someone, when your memories are woven together so tightly, you can't always remember which stories are yours and which ones you heard from them, when someone has been your witness and your anchor through the worst nights of your life. You don't suspect them. Not really. Not fully. Because suspecting them fully would mean dismantling something you need to survive. So you find the innocent explanation, and you hold it, and you keep going. I kept going all the way to the Mid-Atlantic Marketing Summit. The conference was 3 days. I arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, checked into my room, a corner room on the 14th floor with a view of the Capitol Dome, which felt like an omen, and spent the first day in panels and workshops and the kind of animated hallway conversations that I genuinely loved, the collision of ideas from people doing similar work in different contexts. I was presenting Thursday afternoon, a 45-minute slot on integrated digital strategy for healthcare adjacent brands, and I was prepared down to the bone. I'd been working on that presentation for 6 weeks. Thursday morning, I was at the networking breakfast, coffee in hand, feeling good, confident, grounded. My name tag said Cassandra Monroe, Callaway and Reed, and I felt deserving of every letter of it. And then a woman I didn't know appeared at my elbow, pearl earrings, cedar perfume, hands already tightening on a cocktail napkin, though it was barely 9 in the morning, and she said, "Oh my God, you're the real Cassie Monroe." Her name was Vivian Holt. She was a senior director at a healthcare marketing firm in Baltimore, and she'd been in this industry for 15 years. And the expression on her face as she stood across from me in that breakfast room was something I will never forget as long as I live. It was the expression of a woman watching two things she believed to be true suddenly cancel each other out. "I need to show you something," she said. "Can we sit down somewhere?" We found a quiet corner of the lobby, a cluster of chairs near a window, the city bright and indifferent outside. Vivian pulled out her phone with the careful deliberateness of someone who has been thinking about what to do with information and has finally decided. She pulled up a LinkedIn profile and handed the phone to me. The profile photo was of Danny. Dark hair, coffee eyes, that loose, confident smile. The name read Daniela Monroe, marketing strategist, digital integration specialist, speaker. I read the bio. It talked about 8 years of experience in healthcare adjacent marketing. It listed a portfolio of clients, several of whom I recognized as my own. It described a speaking presentation at the Mid-Atlantic Marketing Summit. My presentation, my topic, my title, almost word for word. Under education, it listed Virginia Commonwealth University, my graduation year, my degree. Under about, in the first paragraph, it described growing up with a passion for marketing and storytelling in a small Virginia town. My small Virginia town. My passion, my story, my name. She hadn't just borrowed my career. She had borrowed me. I sat there in that lobby chair and I felt something that I can only describe as a kind of vertical falling. Like the floor had opened and I was dropping through everything I thought was solid. My hands were completely steady. That surprised me. You'd think your hands would shake. Mine were still, almost unnaturally still, and my vision was very clear. And I was aware of every sound in that lobby. The elevator chime, someone laughing at the check-in desk, the distant clink of breakfast dishes. "How long have you known about her?" I asked Vivian. My voice came out level, professional. "About 8 months," she said. "She pitched our firm last spring, sent over a proposal. I mean, Cassie, the work was genuinely impressive. That's the thing. We were interested. We started talking. She came to Baltimore twice for meetings. She was good in the room, very convincing." Vivian shook her head. "She said she was presenting here this week. That's why I'm here, actually. One of my colleagues is attending specifically to meet her in person and discuss a contract. And then I saw your name tag this morning and I thought I was losing my mind." "Is she here?" I asked. "Is she at this conference?" Vivian's face changed. "I don't know. She RSVP'd. My colleague texted her yesterday to confirm and she responded. She might be here right now." I looked around the lobby. All those conference badges, all those faces. Anyone could be anyone. "Can I take a screenshot of this profile?" I said. "I'll send it to you directly," Vivian said. And she did. Right there, while I watched. I felt my phone buzz in my hand as the screenshots arrived. Photo of the profile, the bio, the experience section, the education, the about section with my story in it, dressed in slightly different words, wearing her name like a coat she'd found on a chair and decided to keep. I sent the screenshots to my email. Then I sent them to my personal cloud storage. Then I sat there for another minute and breathed. "Thank you," I told Vivian. "I need you to keep this between us today. Can you do that? Don't tell your colleague yet. Don't warn Danny. Can you give me until tonight? Vivian looked at me for a moment with an expression of deep, precise respect. Absolutely, she said. I went and gave my presentation at 2:00. 45 minutes, full room, standing ovation from about a third of the attendees, which in a professional conference is practically a riot. I answered questions clearly, shook hands, exchanged cards. I was completely present and completely professional, and inside I was a locked room with something enormous pressing against the door. Because I was building something. Quietly. Methodically. The way I build everything. I spent Thursday evening in my hotel room on my laptop. I went through Danny's LinkedIn profile with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world, which I didn't have, but I was going to act like I did. I documented everything. I made a list of every client name she'd referenced, every piece of work she'd claimed, every specific detail that mapped back to me or to my career. Then I started searching. She had an Instagram. Of course she did. Under the name Daniela Monroe, with a following of about 4,000 people, she'd been posting what appeared to be behind-the-scenes glimpses of a marketing career. Work from coffee shops, screenshots of email threads with client names redacted, a photo of her presentation slides that were, I realized, a slightly redesigned version of a deck I'd built 18 months ago. A post about preparing to speak at her first major conference. The caption talked about how nervous and excited she was. It had 847 likes. 847 people were celebrating a moment that was mine. I kept searching. She had a personal website, portfolio page with case studies, 3 of them, all of which described projects I had run, with the details slightly altered, the client names changed to protect, supposedly, confidentiality. They read exactly the way I would have written them because the strategic thinking behind them was mine. I'd done that thinking, I'd done that work. I'd sat at my kitchen table at midnight with cold coffee and worked through those frameworks, those approaches, those solutions. I found a Facebook post from about 2 years ago from a woman I didn't recognize, tagging Danny and saying, "So great to finally meet the woman behind all that incredible DC marketing work. You're even more impressive in person." And Danny had responded with a smiling emoji and, "So glad we connected." I found, buried in a comments section on a marketing blog, a reference to a D. Monroe who had contributed some strategic insight in an online discussion forum. The insight was something I had literally said in a phone conversation with Danny, word for word, 3 years ago. I remembered saying it because I remembered being proud of the way I'd phrased it. Sitting on the fire escape of my old apartment, watching the sun go down behind the Columbia Heights rooftops. She had taken everything, not dramatically, not all at once, but over 3 years, piece by piece, the way you dismantle something carefully so no one hears the pieces falling. She had taken my career history, my education, my clients, my frameworks, my presentations, my voice. She had constructed a version of me and walked around inside it, shaking hands, collecting praise, building a reputation. She had borrowed my life the way you borrow a sweater, casually, without asking, with the quiet confidence that you'll return it before anyone notices. Except she hadn't returned it. She'd been wearing it for 3 years. I sat on my hotel bed with my laptop and all this documentation spread out around me, and I let myself feel everything that was trying to get in. I let the hurt come first because it deserved to come first. The grief of it, because that's what it was. Grief. The loss of something I thought I had, which was a friendship so deep and solid, I'd built part of my identity around it. The girl from Harlow Creek who made it with her best friend beside her, who never had to be lonely because she had Danny. That story wasn't true. It hadn't been true for years. I was sitting in it, like a house that had been hollowed out from the inside, wondering when the walls were going to fall. I cried for about 15 minutes, hard, ugly crying into a hotel pillow, completely alone in a room 14 floors above a city that didn't care. And then I stopped. I washed my face with cold water. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles, red eyes, jaw set in a way I recognized from my mother's face in tight months. The face of someone who has decided. I went back to my laptop and I started to plan. The first thing I did was call Marcus. Marcus Delaney was my coworker, technically a peer, though he'd been at Callaway and Reed 2 years longer than me, and knew the industry the way a mechanic knows an engine, by sound and instinct and 10,000 hours. He was also one of the most trustworthy people I'd ever known, constitutionally honest in a way that could occasionally be inconvenient, and was always, ultimately, invaluable. I'd helped him through a rough performance review 3 years back, and he'd never forgotten it. We had the kind of friendship that doesn't require much maintenance because the foundation is good. You can call each other at 10:30 on a Thursday night and the other person picks up on the second ring. He picked up on the second ring. "I need your help," I said. "Something happened. I can't explain all of it right now, but I need you to pull the client files from the Hendricks account and the Gentry Urgent Care account and document who originated what, with dates. I know that sounds insane. I'll explain everything tomorrow." There was a pause. Then Marcus said, "Done. What else?" "That's all for now. Thank you." "Cassie." His voice was careful. "You okay?" "Not even a little bit," I said. "But I will be." I hung up and looked back at my screen. Here's the thing about revenge, and I want to be precise about this because people misunderstand it. Real revenge isn't anger. Anger is what you feel in the first 15 minutes, in the hotel bathroom with the cold water running. Real revenge is what comes after, when the anger has burned down to something cleaner and harder. It's architectural. You build it the way you build anything good, methodically, with the right materials, making sure the structure will hold. I didn't want to scream at Danny. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation in some parking lot. I didn't want her to know, yet, that I knew. What I wanted was something much more specific. I wanted every door she'd been opening with my key to close at exactly the right moment, while she was standing right in front of it, so there was no possible interpretation of what was happening except the true one. I wanted her to understand, completely and publicly, and without any possible retreat, that she had built her entire professional existence on a lie. And I wanted the people she'd deceived, Vivian's firm, the clients she'd approached, the 4,000 Instagram followers, every single person who had told her she was impressive. I wanted them all to know it at once. I texted Vivian, "Are you still willing to help me? I have a plan." Her response came back in under a minute. "Tell me everything." I didn't sleep Thursday night. I lay in that hotel bed and worked through the plan, all its moving parts, all its contingencies. At some point around 4 a.m, the city outside my window started shifting from dark to that particular pre-dawn gray that feels like the held breath before something. And I lay there in it and thought about the girl on the fire escape in Columbia Heights, watching the sunset with her phone to her ear, saying something she was proud of to the person she trusted most in the world, not knowing that person was already holding a pen and writing it down under a different name. I thought about every conversation I'd had with Danny over the past 3 years. Every time I'd described a client challenge and she'd asked clarifying questions. Every time I'd walked her through a strategic framework because I thought I was helping her build her own practice. Every time I'd mentioned a conference, a networking event, a new contact, and she'd said, "Oh, that's so interesting. Tell me more." And I told her more because that's what you do with someone you love. You give them everything. You hold nothing back. She had taken everything I gave her, and she'd put it in a bag with her name on it. I thought about the fact that she must have known every single day for 3 years what she was doing. that every phone call, every visit, every "I'm so proud of you" was constructed on top of that knowledge. She'd watched me work and struggled and succeed, and she'd been simultaneously harvesting everything I produced, like a shadow that learns to walk by itself, like a reflection that stops following you and starts going its own way. I thought about her mother, whether her mother's illness had been part of it, whether the stress and the fear and the feeling of helplessness had broken something in Danny that allowed her to do this. I sat with that for a while, with some genuine compassion, because I am not a person who finds it easy to abandon compassion even when I've been destroyed. I thought about whether there was a version of this that was tragedy rather than betrayal. And I decided no, because tragedy is accidental. What Danny had done was deliberate and sustained and escalating. She hadn't stumbled into using my name once and felt guilty about it. She'd built a structure. She'd grown a career with roots dug into my life. She'd let it compound, year over year, getting more ambitious as she got more comfortable collecting opportunities with my credentials, my reputation, my name. You don't do that by accident. You don't do that without knowing, every single morning when you wake up, exactly what you're doing. I got out of bed at 5:30 and made terrible hotel room coffee and sat at the desk by the window and started writing emails. By the time the conference breakfast started at 8 on Friday morning, I had sent 12 emails. I had spoken with Vivian twice more. I had a phone call with Marcus at 7 a.m. in which he told me he'd pulled the origination records and could produce a documented timeline of my work on every major account I'd mentioned, with dates going back 4 years, signed off by our company's project management system. I had a conversation with our firm's legal department, just a brief, orienting conversation, laying out facts, not yet asking for anything. And the attorney on the other end had said, with a kind of quiet professional excitement, "Cassie, you need to put everything in writing and send it to me by end of day." I had also, at 7:45 in the morning, followed Daniela Monroe on Instagram from a fake account I'd created 3 months ago when Priya had mentioned the mixer in Richmond, and something in me had started quietly, almost unconsciously, gathering information. I'd been doing my own quiet gathering for 3 months. I just hadn't known what I was gathering it for yet. The last thing I did before I walked into that breakfast room was send Danny a text from my real phone. Just a simple one, the kind I'd been sending for years. "Hey, how's your week been? Miss you. Call me this weekend?" She responded in 4 minutes. "Miss you too. Call you Sunday for sure. Hope the conference is going amazing. You deserve this so much, Cass." I stared at that message for a long time. You deserve this so much. Then I put my phone in my bag, straightened my blazer, and walked in. Friday was the last day of the conference. There was a closing keynote, a final networking lunch, and then a late afternoon reception sponsored by 3 industry organizations, including the firm where Vivian was a senior director. That reception was the venue I'd chosen. Vivian had arranged for Danny's contact at her firm, a junior director named Christopher Rains, who had been corresponding with Danny for months about a potential contract, to invite Danny to the reception. Christopher had texted her that morning. "Looking forward to meeting you in person today at the closing reception. 3 o'clock. She had confirmed. She was coming. She didn't know I was there. At 2:45, I was standing near the entrance of the reception hall, talking to a woman from a Philadelphia agency about audience segmentation, fully present in the conversation, fully calm, watching the door. At 2:58, I saw her. She was wearing a dress I didn't recognize. Navy blue, professional, lovely. Her hair was exactly as I remembered it, that dark waterfall she'd always had, but there was something different in how she carried herself. A confidence that I recognized because I'd watched it emerge over years of our friendship, only now I understood what it was built on. She was scanning the room with a practitioner's eye, looking for Christopher, looking for opportunity. She didn't see me. Not yet. I excused myself from my conversation with a smile and moved to where Vivian was standing near the center of the room. Vivian had gathered a small group, 6 people, all of whom I'd spoken with briefly during the conference, all of whom had been told just enough to understand what they were about to witness without being given so many details that they might intervene prematurely. Christopher Rains intercepted Danny near the bar, exactly as planned. I watched them shake hands, watched her smile. That smile I'd seen 10,000 times, warm and direct, and built to make people feel immediately comfortable. She was good. She'd always been good with people. It was one of the things I'd loved about her. Christopher guided her toward our group. The moment she saw me was the most significant moment of my adult life. I want to describe it with absolute precision because I have replayed it more times than I can count, and it never loses its clarity. She saw the group first, smiled, started her approach, and then her eyes found me, and the smile just stopped. Not dramatically, not a gasp, not a stumble. It stopped, the way a clock stops when the battery dies. 1 second it was there, and then it wasn't, and her face was blank, in a way I'd never seen it before. Blank, the way a face is blank when it's receiving information that it doesn't yet know how to process. "Danny," I said. She looked at me for a full 3 seconds without speaking. "Cassie." Her voice was careful. "I didn't know you were at the conference I've been presenting at for the past 2 days," I said. "I know." The people around us were quiet. That particular quality of quiet that happens when everyone in a group realizes simultaneously that what they're witnessing is real and significant and not a thing they should interrupt. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Danny said, and her voice had shifted. Lower, urgent, the voice of someone trying to get ahead of something. "I think we should talk right here," I said, and I opened my phone. What I had on my phone was a presentation, 12 slides. I'd built it Thursday night and Friday morning, the same way I built every presentation. Clearly structured, evidence-based, visually clean. The first slide was a side-by-side comparison. Her LinkedIn profile and my actual career history, line by line. The same dates, the same credentials, the same Virginia small town, my name beside hers. I handed my phone to Vivian, who connected it via Bluetooth to the event's display screen. Something she'd arranged with the venue coordinator that morning, just a quick professional showcase, she'd said. The screen behind us lit up. Danny's eyes went to the screen and then came back to me, and something in them changed. The calculation dropped out. What was left was RAR. "Cassie." 3 years, I said. "Let me show everyone what 3 years looks like." I walked them through it, calmly, professionally, with the practiced ease of someone who had been presenting ideas for a living for nearly a decade. The LinkedIn credentials mapped against my employment records. The case studies mapped against my firm's documented project files, which Marcus had sent me that morning. The Instagram posts time-stamped against my own files. The presentation deck she'd photographed was provably mine, created in my firm's proprietary software, with my name in the metadata. The Daniela Monroe website with my case studies in altered clothing. I showed the email chain between Danny and Christopher Rains, which Christopher had forwarded to me at Vivian's request, in which Danny had referenced her upcoming conference presentation as evidence of her expertise. My conference presentation. My expertise. I showed the post from the woman in Richmond celebrating meeting the woman behind all that incredible DC marketing work. Danny's DC work. My DC work. I talked for 11 minutes. I know because I timed it later, reviewing the video. Yes, someone filmed it, which I had also anticipated because people always film things like this, and I had built the presentation with that in mind. 11 minutes of clear, documented, emotionally restrained, and factually devastating evidence that my best friend of 9 years had spent 3 of them constructing a professional identity built entirely from the materials of mine. Danny didn't interrupt. I'll give her that. She stood there and took it the way I'd taken the first 15 minutes in the hotel bathroom, the full weight of it, without deflection. By the time I finished, her eyes were wet, though whether from guilt or fear or something else, I genuinely couldn't tell. When I stopped talking, the room was very quiet. Then Christopher Rains said, in the flat voice of a man who has just discovered he nearly signed a contract based on fabricated credentials, "I think I need to make some calls." "I think you do," I said. I handed him a folder, physical documents, printed that morning at the Hotel Business Center, a summary of everything I'd shown on screen, with contact information for my firm's legal team. I handed a second folder to the 2 other industry representatives in the group who had been in contact with Danny professionally, both of whom went pale in specific and telling ways. And then I looked at Danny. She was crying now, quietly, the way she'd cried at the end of sad movies in our old apartment, with her chin down and her hands clasped in front of her. She looked younger. She looked suddenly like the girl from the freshman orientation line, and for one terrible moment, I felt the old tenderness rise up in me like a reflex. I let myself feel it. And then I spoke. "I loved you like a sister," I said. "I gave you everything I had, my time, my knowledge, my support, my trust. I thought I was helping you build your life, and you were taking mine apart and wearing it. For 3 years, every time we talked, you were performing a friendship while conducting a theft. And the worst part, the part I'll take the longest to get over, isn't the career damage. It's that I can't look back at a single conversation we had in the past 3 years without wondering how much of it was real." She opened her mouth. I raised one hand, just slightly, and she closed it. "I'm not done," I said. "I want you to understand that this isn't just the end of a friendship. This is the end of Daniela Monroe. That name, that brand, that profile, that website, it all comes down. My legal team will contact you Monday morning. You will remove every piece of stolen content from every platform within 48 hours. You will send a retraction to every professional contact you made under false credentials, and you will not use my name, my career history, my work, or any element of the professional identity you borrowed from me ever again. If you don't comply, we proceed with formal legal action, which I am completely prepared to do." I picked up my phone from where Vivian was holding it. "I think we're done," I said. I walked out of the reception hall. I walked through the lobby of the Marriott Marquis, past the breakfast tables that were being reset for some other event, past the elevator bank, out through the glass doors, into the early evening air of downtown Washington, and I stood on the sidewalk, and I breathed. The city moved around me, taxis, pedestrians, someone on a scooter, the distant sound of a motorcycle accelerating up toward K Street. The sky had gone that particular October amber that it gets in DC, when the light is long and golden, and the air has that edge to it, that beginning of cold clarity. I stood in it, and I let it land on my face, and I thought about all the things that were now in motion. Within 48 hours, the LinkedIn profile was down. The website was down. The Instagram account, Daniela Monroe, was deactivated. I know because I checked. Not obsessively. Once, with coffee on Saturday morning, sitting at the kitchen table in my apartment, and then I closed the tabs. The legal process was real, but not long. My firm's attorney sent a formal cease and desist on Monday, as promised. By Wednesday, Danny had responded through her own attorney, agreeing to all terms. Whether she retained an attorney with actual money or just found someone to do a cheap consultation, I didn't know, and I didn't particularly care. What I cared about was the compliance, which was documented. Christopher Raines's firm declined to pursue any relationship with Danny and sent me a brief, formal apology. One of the other industry contacts did the same. The third one, a woman who'd apparently been in early conversations with Danny about a speaking opportunity, sent me a longer email that ended with, "The presentation you gave at the summit was one of the best I attended. I'd be interested in discussing whether you'd be available for our February event." I replied that I would be. Vivian and I had lunch 3 weeks later at a restaurant in DuPont Circle. She was exactly as I'd imagined she'd be outside of a crisis. Funny, sharp, the kind of person who orders the adventurous thing on the menu and then shares it. We talked for 3 hours. She told me she'd been in the industry long enough to have seen professional fraud before, but never anything as sustained or as intricate as what Danny had done. She'd built a whole practice, Vivian said, shaking her head. Real clients, real conversations, real almost contracts. She'd been giving advice to people with my credentials, with your credentials, Presto, for 3 years. Some of that advice might have been good. That's almost the most disturbing part. It probably was good advice, I said. She's smart. She always was. Vivian looked at me carefully. Do you forgive her? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Not the automatic answer. Not the socially appropriate answer. I looked at the breadbasket and thought about Danny's face in the reception hall. That younger face. The freshman orientation girl. I thought about 9 years of real things. Real laughter, real support, real love, whatever else had been wound through it. I don't think forgiveness is the right word, I said finally. I think I understand her more than I want to. I think she looked at my life and saw something she desperately wanted. The validation, the success, the sense of direction. And instead of building it, she borrowed it. Because building is slow and hard and you can fail at it. Borrowing is faster. It felt like a shortcut, maybe. And I think she told herself it wasn't really hurting me, that she was just using ideas, just using a framework, not really taking anything solid. I paused. But it was solid. It was mine. And the taking was real. And the friendship? Vivian asked quietly. The friendship was real, I said. That's what makes it so hard. I don't think she hated me. I think she loved me and envied me at the same time, and the envy eventually won. That happens to people. It's human and it's ugly and it's real. I broke a piece of bread. I miss her. I'll probably miss her for a long time, but you can miss someone and still not let them back. Vivian nodded. And the conference presentation, she said, with a slightly different tone, a smile beginning at the corner of her mouth. The real one. It was extraordinary, Cassie. I meant to say that before all the drama consumed everything. The room was completely hooked. You have a real gift. I thought about that word. Gift. I thought about it driving home that afternoon, sitting in traffic on the 14th Street Bridge with the Potomac shining beneath me in the November light. A gift is something you're given. But what I had wasn't given. Not the career, not the knowledge, not the ability to stand in a room full of professionals and make ideas land. That was built, piece by piece, year by year, from the girl who checked gas prices and read everything she could find, and stayed late, and came early, and worked in the spaces between what was asked of her because she knew, at some cellular level, that the ceiling would only move if she kept pressing against it. Nobody could borrow that. Danny had borrowed the surface, the titles, the credentials, the case studies, But the thing underneath them, the actual engine of it, that was mine and only mine, and it had been working every single day, whether she referenced it or not. I moved apartments at the end of that year. I'd been in my Columbia Heights place for 4 years, and the lease was coming up anyway, and I wanted a new address, partly practical, partly not. I found a place in Shaw, a top-floor unit with a roof access and a south-facing window in the kitchen that got the morning light like a gift every day. I painted the bedroom a color called still water, a blue-gray that settled the space into something calm and deliberate. I did not hear from Danny directly. She did not call, did not text, did not email. I was grateful for that. I thought about what I would say if she did reach out, and I concluded that I would say very little. There was nothing she could explain that would change anything material, and there was nothing I needed from her, including an apology. An apology at this point would just be one more performance. What I focused on instead was the architecture of Forward. That's how I started thinking about it. Architecture. What am I building now? Not what was taken, but what comes next. I threw myself into work with even more focus than before, which my colleagues thought was a crisis response and which was actually something closer to its opposite, a clear-sightedness that comes when all the static is gone. I brought on 2 new clients in the 6 months after the conference. One of them was Vivian's firm, which decided to engage Callaway & Reed for a major campaign, a decision Vivian told me was entirely separate from what had happened, but which I suspected she'd influenced by telling the story about the conference presentation. I was right. The CEO mentioned it directly when we met. Vivian said you were the most composed person she'd ever watched handle a crisis, he said. I want that kind of composure on our account. I also reached out to Philip Gentry, the urgent care clinic client who'd told me a year and a half earlier about the consultant whose work sounded like mine. I told him as professionally as I could what had happened. He listened carefully. He asked 2 questions. Then he said, I always wondered about that. Something felt borrowed even then. I should have said something more directly. He paused. Can I refer you to my sister? She's launching a health tech company, and she needs exactly what you do. His sister became one of my best clients. She's still a client now. I spoke at 2 more conferences in the following year. I started a newsletter about digital strategy that grew to 11,000 subscribers in 8 months, which surprised me, and then, when I thought about it, didn't. The speaking engagement at the February event Vivian's contact had mentioned went well enough that I was invited back the following year and asked to headline instead of present. I thought about Danny at various points through all of this, with decreasing frequency and increasing complexity. Not hatred. I want to be precise about that. Not even anger, mostly. Something more textured. A kind of sustained amazement at human capacity for self-justification, the way a person can look at something wrong and find the angle from which it looks necessary. And a sadness that didn't stop being sad just because it was warranted. Priya told me about a year later that Danny had gone back to school for an actual graduate degree, marketing strategy, at a program in Richmond. She seems different, Priya said carefully. Quieter, more careful about what she says. I didn't respond to that in any particular way. I was glad she was building something real. I was glad she existed somewhere in the world, building something real, under her own name. I hoped it was going well. I meant that without irony. But I didn't reach out. Some doors, once they've been broken through, don't hang right anymore no matter how many times you repair them. The frame is wrong. The weight is wrong. You can put it back on its hinges, but it will never swing the way it did before. Never close the way it closed when the house was whole. My house is whole now. Differently whole. Reconfigured, rebuilt with more intention. Some of the rooms rearranged to better suit who I actually am. The friend-shaped space that Danny used to occupy is still there. the way a load-bearing wall leaves a mark when it's removed. But the structure holds. The structure is actually stronger. Last October, almost exactly 2 years after the conference, I stood in the kitchen of my Shaw apartment at 6 in the morning with my coffee and the south-facing window full of early light, and I thought about the girl on the fire escape in Columbia Heights, the girl who said something she was proud of into the phone and didn't know it was being written down. I wanted to tell her something. Not a warning. Warnings are about preventing things, and I'm not sure I would prevent this even if I could, because what came after it made me into someone more solid, more certain, more fully myself than I was before. No, not a warning. I wanted to tell her, the things you built are still yours. The knowledge, the craft, the 11 years of staying late and showing up and pressing against the ceiling until it moved. That's in you, not on a LinkedIn page, not in a case study on someone else's website. No one can download it. No one can change the name on the metadata of what you actually are. The light came through the window and landed on the kitchen floor in a long, warm bar, and I stood in it for a minute, just stood in it, feeling the weight of myself, the good real weight of a person who knows what she's made of and where it came from and what it cost. Then I set down my coffee, opened my laptop, and got to work.